Right. So it's such a pleasure to be here at Good Tech Fest. Thanks so much to the organizers for having us, and for all of you who are joining in. We really nice discussion. We'd love to leave some time for questions and discussion at the end. And so at that point, we'll invite everyone to come off mute, come on video if you would like to, or type questions into the chat. In the meantime, if you've just joined, it would be wonderful if you could introduce yourselves in the chat. Just a few housekeeping rules. While you're not talking, if you could remember to stay on mute, that would be wonderful. And yeah, we'll get started. So welcome to this session. If you are here to explore the many faces of data maturity, you're in the right spot. I'm Lindsey Gottschalk. I'm the Director of Partnerships at data.org, and I'm so excited to be hosting this session, which I think really does provide a lot of different faces to the different types of organizations that are thinking about data maturity. We'll hear from social impact organization, city government, capacity builder, a funder who's really bringing very, very different perspectives to trying to solve the same problem of how can we better equip the sector to better solve social impact problems using data. So for those of you who don't know about data.org, we are a platform for partnerships. We're really interested in building the field of data science for social impact. What this means is that we think that there's a huge gap in the way that the private sector is able to use data and data science, and the way that the social impact sector is able to use data and data science. And we don't think that that's fair. And I think that that's a big part why all of you are here at this session. We work in sort of three main ways: cases, capacity, commons. The first is, how do we really prove the case, show what data can do? We believe very strongly in the power of storytelling and demystifying this work. We believe so strongly in building capacity, so both of expanding the talent pool of people who are in this career, as well as thinking about how you build the capacity of social impact organizations to do this work. And finally, what are the tools and resources that we can bring to the global commons that can help to sort of push the field along? And so, in this session, we'll talk a bit more about especially those last two pillars, building capacity and supporting the commons. So, where we started from and sort of a bit about why we're here today is that about 2 years ago, data.org ran what we call the Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge, really looking to find innovative solutions across the globe using data science for social impact problems, especially around the financial inclusion space. We got over 1,200 applications from around the globe, learned a lot about where the state of the sector was at, and in that process started working really closely with a number of organizations, really trying to better understand how we could help move along their capacity to do data science work within their organizations. And in that process, I think also tried to match people with appropriate resources, tools, technical assistance. In that process, we learned a lot about just what kinds of supports organizations needed, and started to ask a lot of questions about could there be a better way of sort of having that initial conversation, benchmarking where people are at in their ability to use data, how they think about data strategy in their organizations, and how they think about what comes next in sort of evolving that strategy to better meet their social impact mission. And so, that's where we started to toy around with this idea of, how do you provide the tools and resources that help organizations make that internal assessment, really evaluate where they are today, and have that be sort of the starting point of the conversation for where can they go with data. And so my colleague David is going to say a little bit more about one of the tools that came out of that process, the data maturity assessment, and how we're thinking about that work today. David?
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. I'm David Mascarina, a digital content lead for data.org. Been with the organization since last year, and then as Lindsay mentioned, among our, just putting, our proof in the pudding, as we would say, is to build this assessment tool for data science, social impact organizations. We've partnered with many organizations like DataKind and many others, over almost 20 social impact organizations to test this, to create prototypes. Our main focus is usability, making sure that it's easily usable, not just by technicians, but it's usable by CEOs, by program officers, by communications staff, that it's like easily translatable and malleable, also to make sure that to address and also report back your data maturity. What's exciting about this tool is that it's a very collaborative tool built by the community and for the community. So what's exciting about this is like just seeing it being used live, because I've, since day one at data.org, we were just doing a lot of internal testing and design work, you know how that goes, with it's a lot of these projects, but just seeing this out in the wild and being used by social impact organizations is just really, really exciting. And just like everything that we're going to be everything that this tool is going to be able to help you advance your data maturity, and as well as align with your data strategy. Little sneak peek, our colleague Priyank's going to have a session about this later today, yeah, so we're looking forward to the discussion. With that, I will pass it back to Lindsay to introduce our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I think the important part for us to remember is, this is a tool, it's a snapshot of a moment in time. We really see this as like the overall thing that we're trying to achieve here is being able to better use data and data science to meet your mission. And so what's been, I think, really exciting for me, and I know for David and others on the team, is just to hear real stories from people out in the wild using this, and using it to have conversations about alignment within their organizations, and really sometimes coming up with use cases that we hadn't thought of. And so I think our panelists can all say this better than we can. And I love the breadth of experiences that they bring to this conversation. So first, I'd love to start with Eric. Can you just give us an introduction, who you are, what organization you're coming from, and sort of your role and background?
Sure. I'm Eric Reyes. I'm out here in Chicago. I am a part of careervillage.org, a organization where we're trying to democratize career information for youth. And we do that by crowdsourcing information from all over the globe from many companies, and then students can log onto our site and ask those questions. My background is that I was a former educator out here in Chicago. I taught in the Noble system, and then went to the central office where I did data work for the public school system in the assessment department for about 2 years before I landed in this role. Is that enough background?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And Eric, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you and your colleagues over the past year or two, and really at what I feel is a pivotal point for Career Village. I think that your leadership and your teammates have been investing a lot in your data strategy, and it's been exciting to watch that grow. Can you speak a bit about how that data strategy helps you meet your mission at Career Village, and some of the steps that you take personally in your role to evaluate and evolve your organization's data maturity?
Sure. So as I said it before, our mission is to democratize career information, and we do that by crowdsourcing. So like a student can log on, and then any adult, any professional, one of you out there, we want to answer questions if you want to log on and see them now. And you can give answers to those questions. And one challenge of that is if at the initial instinct is to see, okay, did they use the information? Did they directly change their career path because they read the answer to their question from the person? And the big challenge to that is, I mean, to be honest, like we're a website that we're making things available to people, but we can't actually see that impact because they log off. And logically, we know people keep coming back and people keep giving advice. And so you know that people are using it, and we hear stories of impact. We have anecdotes here and there to like say, hey, this really helped me out. But when you're thinking about your strategy overall, it's not a really great thing to explore because you're going to end up seeing diminishing returns over the long run, trying to figure out, did this change actually happen? So we shifted a little bit to access. So instead of it being, okay, did this change? Like how many people have access to our information and can ask questions and receive information from people? And some percentage of people will be impacted by that. And of course, in the long run, as we get bigger, we're only about 12 people here. So it's not a huge organization, if you're wondering. As we get bigger and, we get more investment, maybe we can start exploring that. But for now, we really are focusing on access. And so our data strategy really helps out with that because, you start focusing on things related to access, like SEO. You start focusing on what's the user experience like. You start focusing on what types of people are coming to your site based off their demographics. Like, hey, I just noticed that there's a big gap in this group and we need to start recruiting people that look like our students. Right now, I would say that our demographics are heavily skewed towards, in America, I should say, we only collect information. They volunteer their demographic information. We have a heavy amount of students who are Black, Hispanic, Asian, and our professionals tend to be professionals who are overwhelmingly a lot white, very white, I should say. And so we are trying to diversify that. And we've even seen that diversity happen over the last 6 months, where we've been really focusing on getting a diversity of perspectives when it comes to career information. So I would also argue that like our data strategy really used to be centralized and the leadership until 6 months ago, I was brought on. That's when I started. And as you pointed out, the investment in data strategy is really in its beginning stages. And so you're changing practices with team members who are used to doing a certain way. And they're really receptive to, now they're using data rather than gut feelings to like make decisions for quarterly planning, for their day-to-day activities. And it's an evolutionary process going from what was before into what is going to happen after we get to a more stable state, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Sort of that experience that you have now is like being part of driving that organizational culture, especially at a moment where your organization is still relatively small. So how can you build that up while you are still a small organization and really, create that culture that's able to stick with you as you potentially grow? Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Same question. Can you introduce yourself, your background, where you work?
Sure. I'm Jen Bondarchuk. I'm the senior data scientist at the City of Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada. I started my data journey with a PhD in psychology, which may seem a little odd, but like learning experimental design was amazing. That was my favorite part of my degree. So then I sought a job as a statistician. In 2013, I went back to school and did remote learning before every university was doing remote learning, and got a Master of Data Science from Northwestern University in Chicago, which I loved. That was great. And then I moved from being called a statistician to now I'm a senior data scientist. Although I wouldn't argue that the work is very much different, even though the name has changed. And one other thing is just when I started working as a senior data scientist, I really saw the value of data management, data governance. And so that's also something I've moved, my interests have shifted a bit. So now to cover a broad range of all kinds of data topics.
Fantastic. And can you say a little bit about some of the issues that you're focused on at the City of Winnipeg?
Sure. It's so at the city, we're 10,000 employees in total. We have 11-ish different departments. And so it's you might hear this word a lot for government or organizations, but we're siloed. So every department is focused on their own work, their own priorities. And so I'm in central IT. And so to have to create a broad data culture or broad, like move forward on data literacy issues at the citywide level is quite a challenge. I have one data scientist who reports to me. And so we've been, even just recently, like a month ago, I've been here at the city for 3 years, and we've talked to people who say, oh, I didn't know the city had a data scientist. So even creating that awareness throughout the organization is a task, a challenge. And then understanding the needs of the different departments and how data science specifically might help them. But we have a lot of interesting projects right now that are just starting out. So it's, yeah, very interesting work.
Well, and I love the point that you made to back up a bit about coming, from a different background. I think that we see that, I mean, there's no one path to become a data scientist or to really to get into, many of the careers in this space. And so, yeah, I love that. I think, we're very, very interested in highlighting that, because I think that probably brings a wealth of perspective to the work that you do, being able to pull that in. So it's also interesting to contrast your work with over 10,000 employees that's very siloed to the organization that Eric's coming from, and just really think about, how different that is in terms of building an organizational culture. I know you said a little bit about, how you're creating awareness throughout the organization about the role that you do. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about building up that data culture within the city of Winnipeg and across all of those silos?
Sure. I mean, so one thing that I've been a part of for a few years, and we're finally kind of getting off the ground now, is we're calling it an information governance committee for this city. So we went back and forth for a while of whether we call it data governance or information governance. So I'm part of that committee, and I think that's, when you think about the data work that needs to be done, that data governance quickly bubbles to the top as one of the key things. So that's one part of what I'm doing. And then I've recently just moved also I was in an enterprise architecture department in IT, which to me, it's funny, like data science also can fit anywhere. And that's the thing, like the city has chosen to put the central data scientists in IT, but the departmental data scientists are working in the operations teams. So we have both, and I can't say which one is better. I think there's arguments on both sides, but that's an added challenge. So I think just trying to get that broader understanding of how data science can fit and what it can do is kind of one of the ongoing challenges.
Mm-hmm. As well as an opportunity, right? When you open someone's eyes to what potentially could be done with data. Very exciting. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Zan. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your background and the organization you're coming from?
Sure. Thanks, Lindsay. My name is Zan Paxton. I'm head of data insights at a company called Data Elevates, and we are a small business focused on helping social impact organizations make better use of the modern data systems, of the data assets they have, to improve their impact. And so we do a lot of capacity building work for NGOs, for small government partners, as well as direct training of vulnerable communities who are interested in learning more data skills to enable economic opportunities. Personally, I actually got into this world. I started as a health policy analyst, a quantitative researcher focused on, looking at, doing cost effectiveness modeling, doing impact modeling on health projects. And over time, I wanted to do more. I wanted to be a little bit more involved in kind of the collection and management and storage of data systems. I also got interested in things like machine learning, which to me weren't all that different than the econometrics and things I was doing as a quantitative researcher, just different principles applied in different ways. As we've grown, I think, as a company, Data Elevates, one of the things we found, actually, I think some of the themes that Jennifer was just hitting on really resonated with me. We came into this thinking we were going to do a lot of analytics and a lot of data science with NGOs. And actually, one of the things we found is in many cases, there's a bigger need for focusing on data governance and building more kind of foundational data management practices. So we do a lot of that work now as well.
I love that point. Well, I think a lot of times in the data and technology work that we all do, I think governance really touches a lot on relationships and people and trust, and that tends to be something that I think we all understand how important it is, but sometimes it gets left out of the equation. So thank you for bringing that up. So I'd love to know, you have experience working with social impact organizations around the globe to build data capacity. Realistically, in that space, there are often trade-offs that need to be made. For example, around funding constraints, which might limit the initial investments that organizations can make in data and technology. So how do you think about, priorities and what strategies have you seen been successful for improving data maturity, especially for those organizations sitting out there wondering what to prioritize next?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Lindsay. One of the things, actually yesterday I was listening to a talk by some partners at Driven Data, which is another small consultancy that focuses on data science. And they had a really great slide that was the data science hierarchy of needs, and it was a pyramid. And at the bottom was basic things like making sure the data is reliable and being collected in a consistent way, in a way that's trustworthy. And I really feel that that kind of nails our approach to building data maturity, which is to really focus on the foundational aspects. If you jump in and think, okay, we're gonna, I heard about this thing called machine learning or AI, and I really want to use these things, and I want to do it, in a way that's customized and not just pull off the shelf solutions. I think you're going to find pretty quickly that that there's a lot of homework that needs to be done. You need to eat your vegetables, and that's really where focusing on data governance comes in. That's being able to trust your data, making sure that it's reliable, that it's complete, and that it's timely enough to answer the kinds of questions you want to answer. And so I would really focus, if I was an NGO coming into this, I would really focus more on defining what are those research questions that you really want to see answered, and making sure that your data system, whatever that is built to support answering that question. And that requires some hard prioritization about what's really important in the short term. Now, in terms of expanding that over the future, I think that a lot of organizations are investing more of their kind of overheads, their kind of discretionary funding into their data systems. But I also see that there are a lot of partners now. If you're an organization that goes out and looks for funding from donors, as many of the organizations we work with do, you're also seeing a lot more willingness among partners to actually fund those kinds of investments in those organizations. And I think, again, data.org is a great example of this. But that requires having those project designers and program designers being aware of what's possible and building those investments into the project at the very beginning. And that's actually usually, and if you're just going to the M&E team at the very end of your proposal process and saying, okay, like throw together a monitoring and evaluation plan, you're going to lose a lot of opportunities to invest and be proactive about the way that you approach. And so that requires having an organizational-wide data governance strategy so that you have a consistent approach to investing that across your projects and you're collecting data consistently across your projects. So I think that there's a lot that can be done without having to invest in really fancy data systems. But there are more and more like cloud-based tools. If you're worried about the technology side, there are more and more cloud-based tools that can make that accessible to small organizations, but that doesn't obviate the need for the really important having that strategy that's consistent across your projects, which is probably the harder part of the investment.
Right, and that upfront planning time to make sure that you're really focused on the right problem, and yeah, so to build on that and maybe provide some of the funder perspective, I want to invite Naman to introduce yourself, Can you say a little bit about your background as well as the organization that you were coming from?
Sure. Hi, my name is Naman Agarwal. I'm based out of New Delhi. I'm a computer science engineer and a lawyer by training, and I've zigged and zagged my way to becoming a funder / investor. I used to work with law firm initially, where I advised companies on equity and commercial transactions, majorly tech companies, as well as provided public policy advice. After that, I did my own startup, and then worked with a public policy, a digital rights organization called Access now. And now in my new role, I'm with Umedia Network India, leading some of the digital society work at Umedia Network in India. What we are essentially doing is we are a social impact based venture capital fund where we do a dual checkbook approach. We do equity investments in startups, and we also do grants. The mission of the organization is pretty simple. We want to invest in bold entrepreneurs, which are able to build organizations which help better the lives or provide a meaningful life to the next 500 million population of India. The next 500 million is basically the 500 million people who are going to come onto the internet for the first time in India, which is probably the largest population which is going to come on in a country. Yeah, and that's it about me.
Well, yeah, and what a fantastic opportunity, and also a challenge. And also just, as you were speaking and introducing yourself and your background, it's really quite striking, just the range of backgrounds that you all come from in terms of different studies, career paths. It's part of what I love about this work. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you see data strategy as being important to social impact-minded organizations? And what can their data maturity tell us about the potential to deliver on that strategy, as well as the investments that are needed to better support that work?
Sure. I think you're mentioning about career paths, and I must say that I don't think there is a career path existing now where you do not land up working on data. So that's one. But as a funder, I think the fact that the data maturity assessment is basically telling you where you are. I think the sort of levels you've created tells you, what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. It's a 15-minute test, but it allows you to sort of think through what where you are in the data journey. Like it helps you understand how and why are you asking the right questions about data. And I really appreciate Alexander's input that, maybe funders were not initially thinking about, how do you build capacity in organizations for using data, but that's not the case anymore. For example, we have this project called the Vision Project, where we are trying to develop capacities within social impact organizations in India. We've not done data yet, but we're hoping to do that in the second TVP 2.0 avatar that we have. I think organizations can benefit with data majority into basically two sectors, right? One is the organizational work itself, which is how you maintain your organization. How do you think about your organizational goals, where you want to get to, what you want to do? And I think data is able to sort of inform those choices. And then more importantly, a bunch of our investees, for example, when it comes to research, and especially policy research, are sort of not aware of the ability of data to be able to inform policy based research, and sort of getting those two data-based research versus policy-based research to sort of to be able to talk to each other would be a good outcome to come out of such conversations, right? There's also the difference between primary data and secondary data. So I think one of the speakers was talking about, understanding the data that comes into your organization and how you use it. That's one part. That's data strategy can help with that. But there's also the you need to build abilities to be able to rely on secondary data, be able to see what kind of data which is out there, which can inform the way you're doing things. Lastly, I'll sort of also mention the fact that, data maturity also helps you understand what data cannot do. I think in a lot of situations, we end up thinking that, hey, correlation is basically causation, right? So we do a simple linear regression and we have the answer, which is not the case, right? We need to really understand how curves work. We need to understand the limits of data being able to sort of inform your decisions, and that comes with data maturity. I think you need to make those you need to make those mistakes to be able to understand or maybe learn from others, right? So data maturity sort of helps you understand, helps you sort of use data in a manner to understand its value, but also understand the fact that it has its own limits, and therefore one should not totally, completely rely on data. So I think it's a double-edged sword in that sense.
And I love that point about the value and limitations of data. And I think especially as we think about investments in data and technology, a lot of times we think of certain solutions as the magic bullet, and really it's just a sign of not really fully understanding your own data strategy and where its place is within your organization. So I like that point a lot. As well as, the potential of data as an opportunity to get different types of organizations, stakeholders to talk to each other. I'm going to shift to David, and we'll get into a little bit of some of your experiences using the tool.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, so now we're going to take a little bit look under the hood of the data maturity set for those who have not taken it. And so I'm curious to all of our panelists here, like, were there any surprises, any questions that stood out, any features that you're like, oh, this is nice to have? And how about the results? Like, I'm curious, like, was it surprising, or was it like, oh, okay, it's a route what we're looking for? So yeah, I'd like to open up to everybody.
I can hop in first. I think I really appreciated that it's quick. Like, you can go through it, you can answer the questions, and I love the little output report at the end, because in an organization as big as the city, I know at least one other colleague, we both took it, we compared our scores, and they were very different. So I think that's one of the challenges at the city is we can measure the overall data maturity, or we can measure the maturity of the transit department or of the water and waste department. So we have to be very clear ourselves going in about what it is we're measuring, and then see if we see it the same way. So
wow. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Yeah, because like we're talking about like complex organizations like yours, like how does that measure? How does each of the organization's units maturity differ? That's a great point. Anyone else?
I can say that when we took it, we were actually surprised by a lot of the positives that we had going on. So we were like given data driven, which was like celebrated. We were like, hey, we're doing, we hadn't really thought about where we were at with all these different components. And so, I mean, the fact that like we have a data team now, and we're thinking about the right questions was like reflected in the assessment. So that was nice. It was like a self-esteem booster in a lot of ways. Like, hey, confidence, we're moving in the right direction. So I think that was the most surprising thing, where it's like, it's kind of confirming what you're feeling in a good way. Yeah. And so it gave us some suggestions about where we can move forward there.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm curious, like, what you guys do to celebrate?
My executive director tweeted it out.
Yes.
That was pretty funny. Yeah, we celebrated in like our team meeting.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. All right.
So on our side, we've taken a few different data maturity assessments before, and kind of given our position, we kind of have to be familiar with some of the others that are out there. One of the downsides of a lot of the other tools that are out there is they're very much, they come out of the private sector space, and they assume that you're kind of I'm sure in your research, you saw a lot of them are really focused to a private sector for-profit business. One of the exceptions is the CARE assessment. CARE has their own, as well as the data kind assessment. The downside of those is that they're not as user-friendly in the sense of you can't just take it in 15 minutes. So as part of our engagement with one of our partners right now, Fundación Capital, which is another data.org awardee, we did a data maturity assessment last fall using the data kind as one of the starting points for the conversation, but it was very much facilitated because, there's an education process. I think that one of the nice things about this one is that you can just send it out. It doesn't have to be facilitated.
Yeah.
And even going forward, after our partners took it, they started sending it out to their teams as an engagement tool. So just to understand, let's have everyone do it on their own to start building that awareness of what are the kinds of things that might go into data maturity, and then bring those together. The plan is to bring those together to have a conversation and facilitate the beginnings of a discussion about where we should be going with our data governance strategy to address those issues.
Oh, wow, that's great. It's great to know that the GUARD tool, it's validating that we have a reusability there. Thank you. Naman?
Yeah, I think while it's a 12-minute tool, I think it can be a heavily debated tool in the sense that you could complete it in 45 minutes and still not be done with the questions. Because if you have somebody who's really, sitting with you and asking those, you're thinking about those questions. So I think while the questions were fairly broad, they were also very sharp in the sense that it made you think about various things. For example, just one of the things that was popped out for me was, it also talks about who the decision makers are, rather than just, what those decisions or what that data is. The fact that you're also thinking about, what is the access control within an organization when it comes to database decisions is a very interesting thing to sort of think about, and who sort of owns the decisions and the data is something which is quite interesting. And I felt that I took the session talking to Priyank at his home while having lunch. So it wasn't the most serious way of doing it, but the thing that sort of popped out for me was it is a real good conversation starter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the end goal. It is definitely it's a conversation starter within each organization. It asks the right questions, and you can start thinking about these things in an organized manner. One of the things that we've seen with ourselves as well as our investees is that, while you may have the right data, is it answering the right questions, right? Or is it even being available for answering those right questions? The point about silos, right? And I beg to differ in the sense that it's even in small organizations, sharing data between, a person who sits next to you, it becomes difficult because you don't know. You just don't know what should be informing what, and it needs that kind of data first approach, and that would really help you come to terms with the ability of it. For example, we use a tool, and one of the things that we need to do is keep track of our investments, etc. And I was playing with this tool one day, and we realized a lot of the work that we were doing on Excel, it just brings it out to you in a report very easily, right? It's just that people did not know. So just sort of being able to play with these tools and having a data first approach where there's a dedicated person who sort of trains the whole organization on the various potentials of this, and probably has multiple touch points, because when you're onboarded, you probably learn these tools, but you start forgetting a lot of the onboarding, onboarding learnings as you go through. So probably multiple touch points for these kind of things is essential. But yeah, I really liked the data maturity assessment as a conversation starter to ask these different questions.
Wow, yeah, great, thank you. I'm gonna continue this conversation with you, Naman and Zan. Actually, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about how you're using it within your organization, but since you partner with many other organizations outside, with partnering with external partners, how would you think this would be useful for your partners? How this tool be used?
Sure, I think beyond just starting the conversation, I think it also has an inherent framework, maybe because of the way the output is organized with categories and areas to invest, which I think helps you prioritize, because now you can basically if I want to really improve in our data-driven culture or analytics section, I can build activities around that specifically and prioritize those based on, what's the low-hanging fruit and the costs. So I think that would probably be a good way to start. And in fact, that's how we use some of the previous data maturity assessments. The challenge, again, being that was very facilitated and it took a while because you have to kind of build up a certain level of data literacy just to be able to understand what's being asked.
Mhm.
And so I think maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zan's just answered the question. There's not much more than that, right? That it starts the conversation, and second, it allows you to sort of see the weak points or see, get to know what's the maximum point of leverage, right? What are the things that we can do, right? I really love the point about the fact that maybe what we don't need to do is get fancy tools, but just eat your vegetables. I love that one, right? Getting the simple things right and just starting on that journey is able to help you go along. But yeah, I think just starting those conversations would be the best way of going about it, and then you can start diagnosing and putting in place data governance structures, putting in place maybe capacity building, getting dedicated staff in organizations. I think organizations sometimes are just not prioritizing getting a data scientist as opposed to just getting one more researcher who's doing something else, right? So just really brings together the importance of building a data strategy, because when we deal with organizations who are early in their journey of development, you're really for the lack of a better word, you're really trying to see what to feed first, right? And it becomes a difficult conversation to have. And these things sort of, if not give immediate resources, it puts it on the map. You start prioritizing these things and you start understanding how data can become a high leverage activity. Just getting a data strategy going can be a high leverage, high impact strategy. So even from the perspective of priorities and being able to show impact, which is something that all of us work with, you're able to see how that's able to achieve that mission.
Right. Great. That's great. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Eric. After the celebrations, after the notes comparison, we got your results in. I'm curious, how are you? What's next for your organization? How are you going to keep this conversation starter going?
Yeah, so I knew that I can go ahead. So I had we had an analyst start last week doing halftime on my team, and then we have another one starting in July. And so my plan is to do something like this with them to figure out exactly where we're at. And also, I think as Naman once said earlier, that it's almost it's a great conversation starter. And I think it's especially important for us three to be on the same page. And think about is where can we teach these different lessons and make sure that we're choosing the right priorities for Career Village and for what's actually our users, because it's their data, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that I can see us using it for. I think there's also some lessons in there that's more for leadership that I think they'll come in later, where it's like, hey, we need to get our data team on the same page first, and then we can grow into getting into different parts of the organization.
Thank you. How about you, Jen?
I think the city's still in the earlier stages. I think there's still, we could take the assessment more, have more people take it and be able to compare. So I think, again, I mentioned the Information Governance Committee. We've had a few discussions about measuring data maturity, although, as I said, I worked for an enterprise architect, and his view is he would rather see, bigger, more in-depth, really structured kind of assessment. And I just think this is great, as has been said, for a conversation starter. Let's just take this one first. Let's just do, it doesn't mean we can't do a more in-depth one later on, but we need to make sure we're all on the same page, talking about data in the same way. That's even a challenge some days at the city.
Wow. Yeah, great. That's exciting for all of you, and exciting that that this is a conversation started, and I'm excited to see what the future lies with you. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Lindsey, talk about a look ahead of the tool.
Yeah, so thanks. I think we've got a bit of what's next from Eric and Jen, but want to just leave on thinking about. I really, Naman, I think you made the point really that data maturity is not a static state. That this really requires organizations to come back and revisit. And just because someone was trained on a tool, onboarded, at a point in time does not necessarily mean that okay, the organization has achieved a certain status and it will be that way forever, right? This requires some work. So becoming and staying that data-led organization, it really requires reevaluation, ongoing investment, and a continuation of that open and honest dialogue. So thinking about how organizations maintain this over time, Zan, organizational culture is so important to this work. What are some steps that you see that social impact organizations can change in order to foster that data-led culture?
Sure. Unfortunately, I only have a couple of minutes, but maybe a few high points. I think, adopting a data-driven culture is a lot like tech adoption, in that very often, in order to see that that those innovations spread within an organization, usually there are early adopters. So what we've often tried to do is identify data champions. So those people who are influencers, who see the value of what you're doing and can spread it to their teams and be evangelists for the work you're doing. And then ultimately you want to build community. The way you can do that, building kind of a functional data literacy that's appropriate for the individual in their role, ideally through collaboration and reinforcement. So building some sort of, maybe there's data review meetings, or maybe there's some sort of working group or a Slack channel or something where people can share what they're doing. And I think building that data literacy also builds demand. So not just recognizing the value, but then people begin to ask, okay, well, you answered my question about how many people I reached last week or whatever. Now I want to know how this particular subset of people, or did I reach women the same way I reached men? And the questions just keep, they just build on each other. And that demand is what really motivates an organization and keeps an organization going, because once individuals in their work demand, more actionable insights. I hate that word because we use it too much, but once they demand more information, that necessitates investment into data systems in order to have reliable answers. Another way to do that is by closing the loop, by building data products that are actionable, that can be used in people's actual work life. And that's a really hard thing to do. Actually, it sounds easy to build the dashboard, but asking those really hard questions about what are those data points that will actually change the work you do and make it available to you at the moment you need it, is a really tough thing to do. So investing in analysts who understand that, who understand how to tease those questions out of people and answer them in a way that's useful, and to create not just put data in front of people, but help them make the best decision they can. I feel like a lot of analysts feel like they just can put the data out there. You need to really help people make a decision. So that's a whole packaging thing. And then the final thing, and sorry, I'm going off on this, but for us, what we found is that in the social impact space, a lot of what motivates people, even if they don't understand, North Star metrics, so they don't understand, data-driven management, there often is an underlying concern about ethics in data use and management. And that concern, which is very understandable and a healthy thing, can be harnessed as a driver of conversations around how do we manage our data, how do we store our data, who has access to that data. And that in and of itself can be captured, I think, to build engagement and build buy-in for a data governance strategy. So, sorry.
No, fantastic, and thank you. I love to end on an ethics note. And finally, I think a question that many of us have, Naman, from your perspective, how might the philanthropic community better support organizational transformation that's needed to be more data-driven as a sector?
Sure. I think there are three things that come to the top of my mind. One is, I think most funders have a 30,000 feet view of what's happening in a particular sector, and that enables you to see the major gaps or common trends of gaps when it comes to anything, including data use. So the ability to sort of see those gaps and be able to plug them in one way or the other, that could be just as easy as connecting people to the right resources, as well as providing those funds. I think both of them are equally, you're looking for the highest leverage opportunity, right? So being able to do that and being able to provide awareness of these gaps, because you're able to talk to a lot of organizations on a regular basis. I think funders or philanthropic organizations are well equipped to do that. The second is be just more open to capacity building initiatives, right? I think all of us, all organizations have goals at every stage, right? And one should not sacrifice the long term for the short term. And I think what we need to realize is that, project funding, while important, being able to build capacity within organizations is probably equally important, right? And all philanthropic organizations and all sorts of investors actually are sort of could be blamed in a way for not being able to see that for the longest time, right? We do not have a perfect solution yet. So being just more aware of the fact that we need to build long-term capacity, which may not show in short-term results, is important. And that's where the sort of third point comes in, which is it's the data paradox, right? The data that we collect sort of ends up making us more focused to the short-term objectives of a particular organization, right? So you end up being incentivized to sort of fund projects and specific goals rather than capacity building in institutions, right? So it's the data paradox that the data that you have ends up informing you to not invest in data. So that's just being able to sort of build tools and understanding within funders as well as investees is really, really important, to be able to understand how do you measure, how do you sort of think about the return on investment on these kinds of things, right? And it's important to sort of have those conversations very frankly and very without thinking about whether that's the right framing. Just having those conversations which are more transparent sort of helps you get to where you want to get to, not sacrificing the short term as well as the long term.
Thank you for that. And really happy to see that a lot of our philanthropic partners are moving in the direction of how they can better support the capacity of organizations to get there. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our panelists. You were all fantastic. We appreciate so much your perspective on this work and your dedication to the mission that you're trying to serve. And thank you so much to all of our audience members. Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of Good Tech Fest.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This was a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for inviting.
All right, let you all go, but really thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.